Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Trick or Treat. My name is Csengele Barta, and today I'm going to be your guide in the mysterious, but in the same time very bizarre, sometimes sinister, but nevertheless extremely exciting world of carnivorous plants. Carnivorous plants are exactly as they sound. They trap, they snap, they stick, and they make slip. They use a variety of modified leaves in order to catch their unsuspecting prey. Plants typically rely on the environment for a variety of resources, which include sunshine, rain, certain temperature range and air, but they also use and rely on a variety of mineral nutrients that they typically absorb from the soil, such as nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and many others. Well, carnivorous plants live in environments that are very, very poor in some of the mineral nutrients, especially in nitrogen and phosphorus, such as peat bogs or a variety of swamps. Therefore, these plants have adapted to these environments by using other sources of nitrogen and phosphorus, specifically sources that are organic sources that derive from the unsuspecting prey that they catch, that they are able to digest and therefore rely on nutrition coming from organic matter. Now, these plants are spread all across the globe today, and there are over 750 species on pretty much every continent, perhaps with the exception of Antarctica. But the carnivory has evolved multiple times in the plant kingdom, leading to an enormous diversity of mechanisms that these plants are using to catch their food. One of the examples that you probably are familiar with, or most likely familiar with, is the Venus flytrap. And the Venus flytrap lures its unsuspecting prey with the promise of sweet nectar. Therefore, a fly or some other insect that is foraging for nectar, foraging for food itself, gets trapped into the snap trap of the Venus flytrap leaves. These leaves are shaped pretty much like a book, and they have a midrib along which the trap is able to close. As the insect is crawling into the trap, it triggers one or more of these internal hairs that send an electric signal to the midrib area that allows water to move in and out extremely quickly from that midrib, leading to the very quick snapping of the trap. Now, once trapped, the insect will keep on struggling and touch more and more of those hairs, triggering even more of those signals that will allow this plant, allow this plant to release a lot of digestive material, digestive juices that will essentially digest pretty much alive this poor insect trapped into the trap. Now, these traps are designed in a very, very specific way. The insect has to touch with at least a 20 to 30 second period interval 2 of the 3 trigger hairs that are on either one of the sides of the trap. And as the insect is touching those hairs, that initiates the signal that will lead to the closure of the trap. As the insect is struggling, the other hairs will be touched as well, which triggers the digestive process itself. Now, if the insect is large enough, then it will not be able to escape in between this prison bar-like fringed teeth on the 2 sides of the trap leaves. Nevertheless, if insects are small, potentially they can still crawl out in between the teeth of this fringed trap. Now, why would a Venus flytrap want to release some of those insects? Well, if it's an insect that's small enough to crawl through this trap, Why spend any energy on digesting that insect when they can catch a larger prey as well? And of course, the insects are touching multiple of those hairs in order to trigger the closure of the trap, and that's a resource that allows this plant not to necessarily respond to false alarms. For example, when a rain droplet hits the trap, or a speck of dirt is going to get trapped into the trap itself. Sinister, right? Now, Venus flytraps have been described and documented to trap not only insects, which makes them extremely interesting. You have seen how it's able to catch a small frog, but when it bites a little bit too much, when it tries to catch even a slug, then it's not working out all that well for the Venus flytrap, as the slug is big enough to be able to very slippery, in a very slippery manner, to crawl out from the trap that has been shut. Now, after a while, these traps will after the insect has been digested, the trap will reopen again, and it can go back to trapping further prey for breakfast, dinner, and perhaps even for lunch. Now, another example of carnivorous plants is the sundew, and the sundew has relatively flat leaves, but these flat leaves are covered by thousands of hairs with a variety of glands, and these red hairs exude beautiful liquid that's glistening in the sunlight, so a thirsty insect, or an insect foraging for nectar or some sort of a sweet treat, can very easily land on on one of the leaves of the sundew. Now, once the insect lands on the glandular extensions, glandular trichomes of the Sandu, unfortunately, realizes that these liquid droplets are not as sweet and not as good of a treat, because they are extremely sticky, and the insect gets trapped, gets stuck onto the leaf, and more it struggles, more of these hairs will start hitting its back, and therefore sticking it even further, even more to the leaf. And once the insect gets exhausted and loses energy, eventually the Sundew's leaf will kind of curl around the insect, and it's going to start releasing the digestive liquids again, digesting the insect itself alive. How sinister. And this is what happens. So as the insect is struggling, more of the sundew hairs are touching it, sticking it even further, making the insect exhausted, and the leaves curl up onto the unsuspecting caught prey. An interesting species is the roundleaf sundew, which is kind of like the sundew, but its leaves are round and also covered with these extensions that exude the sticky liquid, and once the insect touches, again, these hairs will get stuck, but the round sundew's leaf can curl up and completely trap that insect inside the aperture that is generated when it curls up. So its mechanism of catching that prey or killing that prey, digesting it, is a little bit different than that of the sundew, but kind of representing almost an intermediate between the Venus flytrap and the sundew itself. Now, a carnivorous plant does not really have to put in too much energy to movements to be able to catch insects. And a good example to that is the butterwort. The butterwort is endemic to the southern region of Mexico and has leaves that are laced with glands that exude this sticky, really sticky liquid that covers the surface of these leaves. And once an insect flies by or lands on that leaf, it's gonna be stuck to that leaf. It kind of works almost like a flypaper, catching many of the smaller insects in this manner. Now, butterwort is a very interesting species, predominantly because this is one of the few species that's actually able to shed its glandular leaves at the end of the season, specifically when it gets really dry, to protect itself from the drought, but in the same time to protect itself or survive or get through the winter period as well. Now, another group that has an enormous diversity of exotic plants are the pitcher plants. And pitcher plants have leaves that can form these really long tubular structures, or they have leaves that have the shape of a pitcher. And these leaves can retain a large amount of water into which these plants will excrete a lot of digesting fluids. And even though they are extremely diverse, these plants for the most part do not actively catch their prey, but the prey is lured to the pitcher and then inevitably falls into the pitcher and gets digested. Very sinister. One group of pitcher plants that have the very long tubular leaf shape is the group of the Sarracenias, and the Sarracenias lure their insect prey with the huge diversity of amazing colors that they have. They can range from green through all shades of red, purple, pink, white, and they are extremely colorful, and in the same time many of these species are releasing fragrances as well that can attract the unsuspecting prey, or they offer some sort of a reward, and that reward is in the form of a nectar or tissue that the insects can feed on. But nevertheless, the more they feed, unfortunately, many of them meet their very sinister end because they fall into the trap. And once they are in the trap, it's extremely difficult to climb back because the trap is very slippery on the inside, and and some species it contains even hairs that make it almost impossible for any insect to get out from the trap if once they made it in there. Now, one interesting thing about some of the pitcher plant species is that these very hidden minefield of traps are often hidden in between flowers, and the flowers of the pitcher plants are typically raised on high stalks. Their colors are often very similar to the color of the pitcher, and an unsuspecting insect looking for pollen, looking for nectar, may as well fall into the pitchers as well. And you see here some of the flowers and the minefield of hidden pitchers in between those flowers. Now, these plants also have a mechanism to protect their pollinators in a way from falling directly to the pitcher by having these areas within the leaf that kind of fold over the pitcher, or having lids. Therefore, after pollination occurred, the insect can fall in, but they prefer the insects that have already finished their pollinating service to these plants. Now, when we look at the sundews are extremely vulnerable and meet a very interesting competition when it comes to their prey, and the competition comes in the form of lizards or frogs that can very easily snatch away from these plants that are typically very short, very close to the ground. They can snatch away their prey. Nevertheless, pitcher plants have often much more elaborate mechanisms that prevent the other organisms to steal the food of the pitcher plant. Specifically, they trap their insects into the pitcher, into the liquid and water that is in the pitcher, so the insect is drowning, and eventually, due to the action of those digestive liquids, they get digested, but they actively can close the lids as well, which prevent other organisms that could potentially rob the food from the plants themselves. Clever, right? Another very interesting group of pitcher plants is the Cobra Lily. Could you guess why it's called Cobra Lily? Well, the reason for it is that the pitcher section of the leaf looks a lot like an attacking cobra. Now, these plants are extremely sneaky, because once they trap the insects, they have the ability to confuse those insects, that makes them struggle much more, therefore become much more tired and fall to their death and be digested. When we look at the surface of these Cobra Lily leaves, we can notice that they have these little windows that are completely or almost completely translucent, which may give the very false and very wrong impression to an insect that they have a way out from this tube, which they really don't, but they fly towards, they try to climb back towards these translucent windows, but there is no way out. They will get tired eventually, and they will stop struggling and fall into the depth of the deadly pitcher in these Cobra Lilies. Now, other pitcher plants are attracting the insects by producing nectar. Some species produce that nectar, that sweet liquid, in these fang-like extensions right underneath the lid of the pitcher plant, and the insect, once it's feeding on the sweet nectar, is going to press on these fangs, which triggers the closure of the lid, trapping the insect again to its death. Very sinister ways of catching their prey. Now, other groups of pitcher plants have other mechanisms, and some of them, for example, some of the Nepenthes species that live in southern parts, Eastern Asia, they do have very long, large, often ribbed edges, rims around the pitcher, and they often exude a sticky, well, not sticky, but slippery and sweet liquid, or they have a tissue that an excretion that will cover these fringed edges. Therefore, the insects or the other kinds of prey, as they hope for a tasty treat, they will start feeding on these extremely slippery rims, and once they get far enough towards the inside of the pitcher, they will very easily just slip inside. So this is a very deadly trap for many insects, and these plants have adapted in a miraculous, wonderful way in order to lure their prey and catch their prey as well, and retain their prey in these very elaborate leafy contraptions. Now, some of these pitcher plants, such as the Nepenthes, does not necessarily hunt for mice. So the mice is not necessarily the intended victim of this very, very sinister plant, but it plays a very important role nevertheless in the strategy of the pitcher, because the pitcher plant offers a tasty treat to tree shrews or mice of different kinds, and some of those treats are evil treats because they contain chemicals that are having a laxative effect. Therefore, the mouse and the tree shrew eventually, immediately as it's feeding, gonna drop its droppings into the pitcher itself. And some of these pitchers are extremely large. They can hold as much water as almost a gallon. So they drop their droppings into the pitcher, and the pitcher plant can actually use those droppings as a food source as well. Ooh, right? These plants are technically eating poop, right? Nevertheless, unfortunately, some of these shrews and some of these mice got out of luck and they slip and they fall into the pitcher. And in that case, if they fall into the pitcher, they will eventually very slowly get digested as well. And finding skeletons of mice or larger mammals in some of these very exotic pitcher plants in the past, in the Victorian era, has stirred a lot of controversy and gave rise to lots of speculations about plants hunting animals and plants hunting potentially perhaps even humans as well. Later science has proven that some of these organisms are not the intended target of the plant, but definitely they can become unintended victims as well. Now, surprisingly, the capability to become carnivorous has actually also evolved in the aquatic environment, and aquatic plants are not stranger to mechanisms of catching their prey as well. And one good example to that is the bladderwort. The bladderwort is an aquatic plant that has these bladder-like structures that are attached to the stem of the plant, and as small invertebrates and crustaceans, potentially even tadpoles, are swimming around this plant, around these bladders, they can touch some of these hairs on the bladder that make the bladder open up, and the bladder is sucking in with a high force and extremely high speed. What you see on this video is a lot slower than it actually happens in reality. It's sucking in the water, and together with that water, the unsuspecting victim of this bladderwort, which cannot escape through the opening that closes again, and it's going to be digested by the digestive juices of the plant. And finally, this is one group of very interesting plants that do not necessarily hunt their prey, but they can use animals and animal droppings more specifically to supplement their nutrition, and that's the Bromenias that we find in many tropical regions. These plants actively retain water at the base of their leaves, which becomes home to a very interesting eco environment containing very often, for example, these can serve as the breeding ground of a variety of insects, breeding ground of frogs, so tadpoles can be trapped in these watery pockets, and all of these organisms drop their droppings into the water that the plant can again utilize as a very efficient, very good source for supplementing its nutrition. Now, I hope that you all enjoyed looking at some of these few examples that are only a few of the many species that today we know about, and in time they are getting even discovered in more exotic areas that have not been explored. And I will leave you with this short TED-Ed animation that's going to give you a little bit more information about the magnificent world of carnivorous plants. I hope you enjoy it.
Little do they know it, but these 6 creatures are each about to experience a very unusual death. One by one, they will fall prey to the remarkable predatory antics of a carnivorous plant. Around the world, there are more than 600 plant species that supplement a regular diet of sunlight, water, and soil with insects, microbes, or even frogs and rats. Scientists believe that carnivory in plants evolved separately at least 6 times on our planet, suggesting that this flesh-munching adaptation holds a major benefit for plants. Carnivorous plants tend to grow in places with highly acidic soil, which is poor in crucial nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. In these hostile conditions, plants that are able to lure, trap, and digest prey have an advantage over those that rely on soil for their nutrients. Take this inhospitable bog, where pitcher plants reign supreme. Drawn to the pitcher's vivid colors and alluring scent, the fly closes in and slurps its nectar. But this pitcher species has an ingredient called conine in its nectar, a powerful narcotic to insects. As the conine takes effect, the fly grows sluggish, stumbles, and falls down the funnel into a pool of liquid at the base, where he drowns. Enzymes and bacteria in the liquid slowly break his body down into microscopic particles the pitcher plant can consume through its leaves. Occasionally, larger prey also tumbles into the fatal funnel of the pitcher plant. The second victim faces off with the sticky Sundew plant. The Sundew's tiny leaves are equipped with a viscous secretion called mucilage. The ant is swiftly trapped in this goo. As she struggles, enzymes begin to digest her body. Special tentacles sense her movement and curl around her, clenching her in their suffocating grip. Once she asphyxiates, which can happen in under an hour, the tentacles unfurl again to snare their next victim. 2 down, 4 to go. The next target meets his end underground, in the coils of the corkscrew plant. He enters the roots through a tiny slit in search of food, but inside, he quickly loses his way through the tangled labyrinth. A forest of curved hairs prevents his escape, guiding him into a central chamber with flesh-digesting enzymes and deadly low levels of oxygen. In the murky depths of a nearby pond, a tadpole unwittingly swims into the path of the Bladderwort, the speediest of all carnivorous plants. She treads on the Bladderwort's trigger, and in milliseconds, a trapdoor swings open and sucks her in. Trapped half in and half out, she struggles to free herself, while the part of her body inside the plant gets digested. Over the next few hours, her writhing sets the trap off repeatedly, each time bringing her deeper into the plant to be digested alive, bit by bit. Meanwhile, this beetle is bewitched by sweet-smelling nectar. The scent draws him closer and closer until he lands on the leaves of the world's most infamous carnivorous plant. His landing triggers tiny hairs on the surface of the leaves, and the jaws of the Venus flytrap snap shut around him. The spikes interlock to seal his fate. Once closed, the leaves act like an external stomach that digests the beetle's soft tissues. When they open again a few days later, only the dry husk of his exoskeleton remains. The mayfly is the last creature standing. As she approaches the butterwort plant, she heads for the flowers that wave high above the plant's globs of adhesive goo. She alights on the petals, drinks the nectar, and takes off unscathed. These long flower stalks keep certain insects away from the carnivore's traps, a way of separating pollinators from food. Off the mayfly buzzes to live a long and fruitful life. Oh. While these carnivorous characters might seem villainous, remember that plants are always under attack. Check out this video to learn how plants defend themselves from fungi, elephants, and everything in between.
Alright, so at the end of our journey, I would like to thank you all for watching this little podcast. And if you have any interest in plants or any other subjects in the biological world, in biology, please do not hesitate to contact us. Your host has been Csengele Barta. I'm an associate professor of biology at Missouri Western State University in the Department of Biology. And here is my contact address. If you have any questions or you would like to share some interesting experience with your carnivorous plants, potentially, as many of these species become more and more interesting for plant collectors as well as for greenhouse use and as ornamental plants, then come and talk to me. Thank you again.